Hello everybody, it's me George, and today I wanted to do the Trad Witch tag. So for those of you that don't know, the Trad Witch tag was started by a YouTuber known as Nomqua. For those of you that haven't seen her channel, I urge you please have a look at her channel. She's very, very cool, she's awesome, and I really enjoy her videos that she puts up. And Nomqua, if you're watching this, I want to take the opportunity to say thank you so much for creating this tag, because essentially, it's kind of allowed me to have like a peek into other practitioners' practice, and I'm a little bit nosy like that. So it's kind of cool to kind of see any philosophy or paradigms or any insights into their daily practice that kind of influence their craft. And just from another traditional witch's perspective, that's something I am interested in. So yeah, thank you so much if you are watching this. So without further ado, God, that was a shit drum roll, wasn't it? Let's get into it. Let's do the Trad Witch tag. So number one, what kind of craft do you practice? So I definitely practice traditional witchcraft, or some people also will know it as folkloric witchcraft. So it'll be witchcraft based from pre-Gardnerian praxis. And I will take from witch trials, I will take from folklore accounts, and that tends to have an influence over my practice as a witch. Not only that, I will also look into the folk magic, the historical folk magic of Britain, i.e. the cunning folk or the wise people. That's something I definitely that has a massive influence upon my practice in terms of the folk magic. Working with plants, working with herbs, that kind of thing, and definitely looking at that. However, having said that, there are different traditions that I look at of witchcraft that are also post-Gardnerian. So, for instance, the Cochranian witchcraft tradition definitely influences my practice. The Sabbatic witchcraft current definitely has an influence upon my practice. I'd be lying if I said it didn't. It really does have quite a stronghold, actually. So, yeah. On top of that, since I've been 16, I've practiced hoodoo and root work. Now, that is a tradition that I keep very, very separate from traditional witchcraft. And I think just out of respect for them as traditions, it's important to keep them both separate, especially from a historical context in terms of their origins and things like that, especially concerning hoodoo. But those are, that is another practice that I do practice in. But primarily, I would say I'm a traditional witch and a folk magician. That's what I would say. Number two, what paradigm, faith, or philosophy informs your craft? I am so glad this question's come up in a tag, by the way. I have been gasping to talk about this, quite frankly, and the reason being is that it is only this year I've been able to actively put what I am down, and I'll go into it a little bit. So I was never raised religious. I was never raised religious at all. My mum's she's a spiritualist. She's a Christian spiritualist at a push, but mainly she's a spiritualist. So we never really grew up with that. And my family's religion on my mum's side originally was Judaism, but we didn't grow up with that at all. We grew up with Christmas and bacon sandwiches. However, I grew up in England in the 90s, and there were certain things where Christianity did play a part. So, for instance, in school assemblies, I used to go to Cubs as well, and we had to hold a hand up and say, I pledge my honour to God and the Queen and stuff like that. It was quite Protestant-based, quite heavily Protestant-based, really looking back on it, but it was the 90s. So, yeah, but I remember whenever they would talk about God, I remember feeling so aware that there was this God and having this idea. But the moment they mentioned Jesus, I just lost it. I'm not with you. I've lost it. And I actually remember feeling quite frustrated, because for me, God was so much more than just put into one human man. And it used to piss me off. I used to think there's a whole fucking planet. That there's a whole planet. There's universe. There's a whole universe. There's whole galaxies. And you're condensing God to one fucking human being? Really? It really used to piss me off. I used to get so annoyed. To the point where, I would get so frustrated in regards to it, that once in school assembly, I got told off because I wouldn't bow my head. I refused to bow my head because I wasn't Christian. I didn't identify as Christian ever. But I definitely had this connection and this awareness that God was everywhere and within everything, and was something that was so transient and something that was so beautiful, and not something that was all merciful, all forgiving, something that just was, something that just was divine, but both sides of the divine, the good and the bad and the ugly. Um, so it's only up until this year I've actually found out what I am. So, in regards to how I see God and how I see the divine, and that is, I am a pantheist. So, pantheism is the doctrine or belief in seeing God as a manifestation of the universe, or seeing the universe as a manifestation of God slash S, or gods. It can also mean the worship or tolerance of other gods. So for me, I see the universe as a manifestation of God. I believe that the planets in our solar system, this earth, the water, the trees, the breath, us, everything is Godhead, is divinity. I definitely believe in higher realms of consciousness, 120%. I think God is also a higher realm of consciousness that ultimately we ourselves can't fully understand or comprehend fully. I think if we could, it would kill us. I genuinely think that it would be too much for us to handle. Similar to ants, you see ants walking along the floor, but do they know what you do? Do they know what your interests are? Can they even comprehend that? We're the ants. That's how I see it. But at the same time, we are part of the connection that is God. We are God, but God is also around us, but it is also something that's also, it's a higher realm of consciousness. But the idea of this old man up in the clouds, I hated it. I could not stand it. It was something that just absolutely, this old man in the clouds making rules and regulations and judgments. No way. No fucking way. So yeah, I am a pantheist, and I've only just found that out. So that's a new thing. And that's good because I've kind of had the opportunity to talk about it. I definitely believe in more than one God. I believe in gods, definitely. I believe in gods of all different religions, 120%. I think essentially we explain God through cultural and societal aspects that we are used to, that we are surrounded to, and we interpret that through that way because that's the only way that we can. But I think Godhead is so much more than that. So yeah, I'm definitely an animist. I definitely believe that everything has a spirit, everything has a life. I believe that gods are just big spirits. Even Godhead is a huge spirit. I'm definitely a spiritist. Because of that, I believe in spirits being everywhere. I practice a spiritistic and ecstatic tradition. So my tradition focuses very much on crossing the boundary, crossing the hedge, crossing into the other world. I would definitely say that I have shamanic influences within my craft. That's not me saying that I am a shaman or a shaman. I'm not that at all. But I'm saying that it definitely has shamanic influences and aspects to it, 120%. I would definitely say that. So I'm definitely an animist as well. I believe the trees, the rocks, the river have spirits. Spirits are everywhere. We are spirits, animals have spirits. Everything has a spirit. Everything has a living, breathing spirit to it. Whether it's plant, animal, water, a river, a lake, a body, everything. So I'm definitely an animist. I'm definitely a spiritist. Like I said, I practice an ecstatic tradition that focuses on ecstatic practice that is very spontaneous and shamanic. I'm also a bit of a Gnostic as well. So Gnosticism, I'm not going to do a whole video on Gnosticism, but essentially there are aspects of Gnosticism, i.e. the idea and the aspect of the divine spark, that spark of God within you, being within everybody as well, that everyone can have access to, that everyone can reach gnosis or knowledge of Godhead. So I definitely would say I'm a Gnostic. I have some gnosis within my practice, 120%. Especially the idea and aspect within traditional witchcraft of the truth lies betwixt the horns. For me, that is Gnosticism. The idea that that magic, that fire, but that divine light lies within the horns of Old Horny, but also within us. And that's something that really does kind of play a part within my practice. I'm also a bit of a Luciferian as well. So a Luciferian isn't a Satanist or anything like that. A Luciferian is a person that looks at the story of Lucifer as an example, as a way to lead their life spiritually. So, for instance, I don't adhere to a dogmatic religion that tells me what to do, how to act, how to be, who to love, who to find attractive, what to do sexually, what not to do sexually, what to eat, when to eat it. Fuck off. Like, that is not me. That has never been me at all. I look at the idea of Lucifer, the rebeller, a person that suffered for freedom and individuation. And that is very much so within my practice. You know, it's very much, don't tell me what the fuck to do, I'll fucking do it myself. Like, that is very much a part of that. And looking at these figures within the Bible, such as Cain, Lucifer, Lilith, Tubal Cain, looking at them as adversaries, as challengers of dogma, as challengers of rule and order. Sometimes rule and order isn't the right thing to do. Just because it's ingrained in rules doesn't mean it's the right thing to do, you know. So for me, I challenge that. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm gonna do whatever the hell I want. And that's very much what I feel like in regards to my spiritual path. I'm very much a left-hand path Luciferian aspect within that, 120%. I'm dual faithed as well. I have elements where I pray psalms, I pray saints, but I don't adhere to the Catholic Church. I don't adhere to the Mother Church. I do my own thing. I'm also partly pagan as well. I definitely have pagan influences. You know, I work with Hecate, I work with Diana, Queen of the Hunt. I've worked with different pagan gods. So yeah, there's a lot. Like, but I feel like traditional witchcraft is a bit like that anyway. I definitely think traditional witchcraft in general is a bit of a mishmash of different things, and I think essentially what I've just done is explain the different influences within traditional witchcraft. But yeah, I'm really glad that that question arose, because it's something that I've wanted to have the opportunity to talk about, but I felt like I've never really had the opportunity to talk about it. So thank you very much for putting that down there. Number 3, what culture or is your practice rooted in? Very much so British culture. I live in Scotland, so obviously Scottish folk magic and Scottish practice now plays an influence within that, but wherever I reside, essentially, is the different influences that I will incorporate within my practice. Wherever I live is very much the different influences that will take an influence into my practice. So yeah, but you know, I do sometimes have a look at other European aspects of practice as well. For instance, Martinmas, I will put the saying the door with blood for the year ahead, you know, and that is Irish, that's not a British thing. And there are also some aspects of other European countries that I will look at, but primarily I would say Europe, but primarily Britain, that's what I would say. How long have you been practicing and how did it all start? Wow. I've been practicing since I've been 11. But not traditional witchcraft. I came across traditional witchcraft first when I was 11. And it's funny because I wanted to practice traditional witchcraft, but at the time I didn't really understand it. I didn't have a full understanding of different elements that they talk about. You know, they're talking about like treading the compass round and things like that. I was like, what? And they're like, the truth lies betwixt the horns. And I was like, what? And then, you know, I saw some elements of sabbatic craft and I was like, oh my God, I actually don't understand what the hell's going on. I was literally like, I don't understand what's going on. So primarily, first of all, Wicca when I was 11. or some form of Wicca-based witchcraft rather, because I wasn't initiated into an Alexandrian or Gardnerian coven. Um, Practiced that, but ever since before then, and I've said this in videos before, one of my first memories was waking up in a room full of people and hearing voices, and I remember really specifically that I woke up hearing loads of whispers, and I would run out, jump out the bed, bolt to the door, open the door, run to my mom and dad's bed, and then get in with them. But I kept doing it, and one night they locked the door. If they ever watch this, they'll be like, "Oh my God, George, you make it look like we abused you on some sort of level." It wasn't like that, but it was just kind of like, you can't keep sort of going into our bed. But they had locked the door, so I had run up and sort of bolted across and gone to open the door. And yeah, the door wouldn't open. And I remember these voices whispering, and I remember the whispers getting louder and louder and louder and louder and louder, and it was so overwhelming. And I looked behind me and I saw this thick black darkness, and it just completely overtook me, and I collapsed and I woke up the next day. And I do fully believe that that was an initiation into the spirit world, into being someone that crosses the boundaries between this world and the other. And I fully believe that. And that was when I was about 7. I've always felt drawn and attracted to witches on some level, be it through stories, be it through media, films. I've always felt very inspired by the concept and the aspect of the witch. Um, and that is something that really is always drawn to me. So, yeah. And when I was about 20, um, I practiced different traditions as well. I did practice different traditions. Um, when I was um, when I was younger, I became involved in a societe, a voodoo society in Manchester, under the um, influence of a Hungan. And that is something that I've done for 5 years that I practiced. But as beautiful as a religion as voodoo was, it wasn't for me at all. And I respectively kind of walked away from that practice. I definitely have memories of that practice that will stay with me until the day that I die, 120%. It was very intense, but it wasn't for me at all. Uh, so yeah, I'd say when I was about 21, I I practiced elements of traditional witchcraft when I was a child, when I was 11, 12, 13, but then Wicca um, kind of took over because I couldn't understand all of it. And I remember doing a dedication ritual as well when I was 11. But yeah, so when I was about 20, um, that's when I fully got to understand what traditional witchcraft actually was and what it actually meant. So yeah, so it's been a journey. It's definitely been a journey. But yeah, that's not long enough an example because there's so many other twists and turns like there always is. Number 5, what books or resources have you first started with? Would you recommend them to others today? This is funny because I was actually speaking to Nico, who is son of Celine. I actually think he's changed his YouTube channel. Nico, I'm really sorry, but we was if I've got the name wrong, so I do apologise. If so, and I'll check your channel out afterwards, and I'll kind of comment underneath what your channel name is. I think you might have changed your channel name. I think you have. I'm not sure. Anyway, we was having this conversation not long ago about kind of brackets, way back when, the good old days. And there are a lot of fond memories of old YouTube. There are a lot of fond memories of different faces that were here that actually no, some of them no, sadly no longer with us today, who have crossed over. But I definitely remember older resources. Witch of Forest Grove is a fantastic blogger, Sarah Ann Lawless, fantastic blogger. And I'm not actually sure if they're still available today. I believe they are, but I would definitely recommend her older kind of blog, The Witch of Forest Grove, because it really had a hold of me actually, and was very well referenced from what I can remember, and really cool. I There are a couple of books I've read, way back when. Nigel Jackson, Call of the Hornpiper, Nigel Jackson, Masks of Misrule, Robin Artisan, Witching Way of the Hollow Hill, The Horn of Evenwood. What else? There was a fair few books that I used to have, that definitely had Gwyn, Light from the Shadows. That was a really old one by Capelban, and A Grimoire for Modern Cunning Folk by Peter Paddin. The majority of these books I would recommend. One of the things I would say, not all of the books, but some of the books I felt weren't, for their time, they was good, and I think Taya Kennedy actually said that, but it's so true. For their time, they were really good, but they're not. Today, we're actually quite lucky in the sense that we have a lot more things are referenced, a lot more things are. There's a lot better references and sources that we have now, regarding that. So yeah, I also remember American Folkloric Witchcraft, which Lorelei done with Blade and Broom. Um, but yeah, it's kind of nostalgia. I'm like, oh. So yeah, there's definitely older references, and some of them I would recommend, some of them I wouldn't recommend. Not wouldn't recommend, but I definitely recommend them all. But I would also say bear in mind for the time that some of them, again, not all of them, some of them weren't as fully referenced as what we're lucky to have access to now. That's definitely what I would say. So number 6, how has your practice and or paradigm changed over the years, if at all? So my practice has definitely changed over the years. I think in particular, I've become a lot more based on older practices of British folk magic. I would definitely say that because I think that's had a huge impact on my practice now. Definitely concerning British folk magic and spirit practice. Um, and my practice has always kind of changed, and I think every practice does. Everything must change. The wheel turns, everything must move. Essentially, there are things that I do now that I didn't do 2 years ago. You know, for instance, there's elements of paganism that I have where I work with goddesses that I wouldn't have done 2 years ago, or I didn't. Not that I wouldn't have done because I had done them in working groups, but as a solitary practitioner, it's not really something that I would have done. But now it is something that I do. So yeah, definitely. I think there are aspects of Christianity put in there, like working psalms, working saints, that quite frankly, as a 13-year-old would have made me be like, ah, like I would have lost my shit. If 13-year-old me could see the stuff that I do now, they'd be like, what? Like you're using Christianity, you're incorporating what the fuck? Like it would have gone crazy. Yeah, I wouldn't have been happy. So I definitely think it's changed, such as the way everybody else's practice changes. So, what does your daily slash regular practice look like? What do you do on a regular basis? Meditation for me is definitely a key, even if it's 10 minutes a day, which normally it is. That is something that I definitely incorporate into my system. And it's something that I have been working into my system quite nicely for about a year, really. Most of the time I do it daily. Sometimes I slip. I'm not an angel. But most of the time I kind of have mastered it. And just as a human being, it's had an incredible impact upon my life and also my practice as well. But meditation definitely. With my coven, I practice full moon and dark moon rituals, which we do, set full moon and dark moon rituals. So I definitely have a regular practice. On top of that, feed in familiar spirits and ancestral spirits is something that I do as well. Normally weekly, but not all the time. It can differ. Life takes over. I can't be practicing all the time. Um, yeah, and also, well, I'd say within The past couple of months, no, admittedly, you need to technically be 40, but again, that's the Luciferian side of me, being a bit rebellious. But there are elements of Kabbalah that I've been studying, the Jewish mysticism, the Jewish tree of life, and that's something that I've been studying, but also incorporating into my practice. And if you look at the letters of Robert Cochrane, he mentions them. If you look at actually quite a lot of different modern traditional witchcraft movements that we have today, they do make mention of Kabbalah, and actually meditating on them and chanting the names is something I've been doing that has been so intense, but has actually definitely benefited my practice as a witch. So yeah, that's something that I've been doing, but I don't do that all the time. That's not something I do all the time. Number 8, are there aspects of your craft that you need to keep secret? In your opinion, is secrecy important to witchcraft? 150% for me personally. If I do a spell and I do a working, most people won't know what I've done. Most people won't know why I've done it. Most people don't know how I've done it. I don't really share much of what I do on YouTube or Instagram. I do and I don't, but normally I'll do, in terms of spell work, not until it's manifested, then I'll share it, but not all the time. But in terms of spell work, I definitely think it's important to keep secret, because I think there's a sacredness within that. Because I think if you've gone to the gods or you've gone to the spirits in which you work and you've said, this is what I need, or this is kind of this, that's between you and them. That's not between other people. I definitely believe that if you give other people insight as of what you've done, you can therefore give people influence over that. So if that person in their head thinks, that's a load of old shit, that's not going to work, that influence is going to go into your spell. So I only tell people that I really trust. 110%. 110%. I only tell people that I trust. I also, in terms of working with spirits, I was always taught that to know a spirit's name is to have power over it. So I would not give anybody else the names of my familiar spirits unless I trusted them. Most people don't know the names of my familiar spirits, because, yeah, I think to know something's name is to have power over it. So I definitely think secrecy is important. I have met people that have been too cloak and dagger and too, to put it bluntly, have been too secretive, where I've been like, okay, lighten up a wee bit. But yeah, definitely I think that secrecy is important in witchcraft, and especially when it comes to spirit work and familiar spirits, because if someone else knows the name of your familiar spirit, they can have power over that. No way. And if that's the spirit that you feed regularly, i.e. your blood, forget it. Just no way. Literally, not even on one hand can I count the names of people that know the names of my familiar spirits. No way. Number 9, what are some of your favorite tools that you use regularly? So I use a bull roarer when I'm out, which is essentially a flat piece of wood attached to a string, and I'll whirl it up in the air and it will make like a sort of sound. And I will use that when I'm outside to call the spirits, because it is a lot more discreet than a stang, definitely. And that's something that is something that I use regularly. However, and it's quite funny because I've literally done videos saying like, I don't use a stang, I've actually got a stang now. And this is what I'm saying, everything changes. Going back to that question, number 6, how has your practice and paradigm changed over the years? Everything changes. You're not progressing or moving unless things change, And I have now acquired a smaller stang. A miniature stang, like a small stang, but I love it. I absolutely love it. It's secretive enough I can tuck into a bag and go to the woods and go and work outside. It's not too crazy, because if you live in a city centre and you have a shoulder height stang, I've done that before. I'm not playing that game, but the stang I have now, I love it. Absolutely love it. And it's beautiful, and it's funny because I actually saw it before it came to me, and it's exactly what it looks like before I saw it. And I just love it. There's something so beautiful and potent about it and powerful. A stang is, those of you watching this, you'll know what a stang is, but essentially it is a totem pole. It's a medium for the spirits of the lower and upper world, and the different worlds to come through. It acts as an axis mundi, a world tree. But I love it. I love it. And I'm still working on it. I'm taking my time with it, but it's beautiful. Number 9, what books or resources would you recommend to newbie witches interested in your kind of craft? So 120%, and I feel like a lot of people have said this, but this book, Traditional Witchcraft, A Cornish Book of Ways by Gemma Gary. I don't practice the Cornish witchcraft current, but I would definitely say that this book over the years has been so influential to witches, and I would definitely say it's an incredible beginner's book and just an incredible book in general. I could not recommend this book enough. I love this book. I always go back to this book. But again, it's based around the landscape of Cornwall. I am not Cornish-based practice. However, like I said, this book is fantastic. Getting to know the compass round, getting to know the arts or the directions, aspects of ritual, different aspects of ritual. This book has it, and it's brilliant. So I would definitely recommend this book. Another book I would recommend is Folk Witchcraft, A Guide to Law, Land, and the Familiar Spirit for the Solitary Practitioner by Roger J. Horne. And I love Roger J. Horne's work, and this isn't a read. Sorry, I'm holding the book. Read, get it? This isn't a read in any way, shape, or form, but what I love about Roger Horne's books is that they are simplistic, and it's not a read because my books are simplistic. The books that I write are quite simplistic, but I think that simplicity is power. That's something I find. If something is quite simplistic, I find it to be quite powerful, and I find it to be quite potent. And I think for a beginner's book or for a newbie witch, I definitely think that something more simplistic at first is definitely, like, I wouldn't say to a newbie witch, go and read As Oisha by Andrew Chumley. I wouldn't say that. I would start them off with books like Folk Witchcraft by Roger J. Horne, or books like from myself, because I think books, or even, Gemma Gary, they're simplistic, but it's evocative, poetic words, and Roger J. Horne very much has the same. And that's what I love about him. That's what I love about Gemma. That's what I love about that, because my practice, if it's about my kind of craft is simplistic, and I like that. That's what's comfortable for me. So yeah, I would definitely recommend that to a newbie witch. It's just a fantastic book. Anything by Roger J. Horne, really. I actually love Roger Horne as an author. The other book that I love is Mastering Witchcraft, A Practical Guide for Witches, Warlocks, and Covens, by Paul Hewson. And I love this book. This book is 70s realness. It's so good. I love this book. There's very much in it. 2 types of witchcraft. One's Wicca, one's more traditional witchcraft, but it's just brilliant. I've just always loved this book. It very much takes on the identity of witch, and it very much finds power within that. But I've always loved this book. I've always loved Mastering Witchcraft by Paul Hewson. It's a really cool book. I've always loved it. It's 70s realness. There are elements of Wicca within it as well, definitely. It's kind of a bit of a mix. But I think that this is a really good book, and I think anybody that is empowered by the word witch, I would definitely read this book, because that's what I love about this book. In terms of visualization as well, I love it. I just love it. So yeah, Mastering Witchcraft by Paul Hewson is a classic. In terms of folk magic, one book I would highly recommend, if it's my kind of craft, is The Cunning Man's Handbook by Jim Baker. Jim Baker has essentially gone, here is the practice of English folk magic from 1550 to the 1900s, and it's a big, thick, juicy baby. You wouldn't sit down and read this book. I would use this as a reference book because it's so big, it's so thick, it's so full of information, it's packed, and you know the writing is in small print, but it is a fantastic book because it's just full of everything. It's absolutely everything within this book. I've, always enjoyed this book, but if you want something to look back to in terms of personal practice, um, yeah, I would 120% recommend this book. I really would, because it's just packed. It's ridiculously packed, but it's packed. You know, it's really, really cool book. But yeah, I would recommend that if you're looking at British folk magic, because British folk magic does play a large part within my practice. Um, and there are some elements of folk ceremonial magic as well there, which again does play a part in my practice. So yeah, the Cunning Man's Handbook by Jim Baker is a fantastic reference book if you're wanting to create your own spells, create your own workings, and create your own charms, definitely. And I'm going to be so shameless. So before I do this, I'd recommend The Crooked Path by Kelden Mercury book. That's a fantastic introduction book to traditional witchcraft. The Black Toad as well by Gemma Gary. All about, West Country witchcraft and folk magic. Incredible piece of work. And yeah, there are so many books. I would recommend even a grimoire for modern cunning folk to newbie witches in terms of energetic work, compass round, tread in the mill, the aspects and basics of that, definitely, because I think that it also explains the basis of traditional witchcraft beliefs, some of the beliefs. Again, the beliefs are different to traditional witches, but essentially, in terms of how to tread the mill, how to lay a compass round, and different aspects within their tradition. It's an oldie but a goldie, so I love that. But this is shameless, by the way. This is so shameless. But I would recommend to a newbie witch, I would recommend The Ineffable Name by myself, A Crafter's Guide to Traditional Witchcraft, forwarded by Gemma Gary. I'm not going to talk about the book much because I've done a video on it, so I'm not going to talk about it much. But that's also the last book that I would recommend. And I think also I would recommend Barbarous Words as well, my other work, because it is about taking older forms of folk magic and turning them into a modern way. But if we're on about newbie witches for traditional and folkloric witchcraft, yeah, I would definitely recommend The Ineffable Name. Barbarous Words is like the operational folk magic get stuff done book, and this is more the ritualistic aspect of witchcraft. So they're like brothers, but Barbarous Words is like a operative folk magic, get stuff done work magic book, whereas this is a ritualistic connecting to spirits, connecting to Godhead book. There is operative folk magic within it, but definitely mainly I would say that this book is more ritualistic based into the traditions overall of traditional witchcraft and folk witchcraft. And again, it's also got stories of myself into it. So yeah, I would recommend my own book. And that's so vain. That is so vain. It needs to be put down. But, if we're recommending resources, yeah, I would. But yeah, so, oh my God. So nearly 40 minutes later, that is the Tradwitch tag. And it's not only been 40 minutes because there's definitely been a couple of retakes. So it's taken me, whoa, mama, it's taken me about an hour. But I got there in the end. But yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed this very lengthy video. Over and out, and peace.